Spoilers for all of Attack on Titan manga. Today, we'll be discussing the Mikasa-Ymir parallel in the last chapter, and all the necessary setup it entails. Those who have been following for a few years know that Mikasa has been mocked by a chunk of the fanbase. She had an early arc of finding resolve to fight and making peace with the cruelty of her environment, but plateaued for some 100 chapters, until Eren tore her apart and mocked her lack of agency at the dinner table during the coup. She once again becomes a key player during the rumbling, torn by indecision regarding her feelings for Eren, but unable to accept his plans for genocide. To discuss Mikasa, we should also mention her trademark scarf that Eren wrapped around her after her family was killed. The scarf had long since been an object of comfort and her reminder that she had a home and importance in the world. But it became twisted somewhere along the way, as Eren realized that she was always going along with him or making excuses for him because he had rescued her as a child. This comes to a head when she clutches the scarf at a dinner table during the Jaeger's coup, saying the same thing again about how wonderful Eren was because he cared about her as a child. Eren tells her to keep her hands on the table, threatening to kill them otherwise. He calls her a slave because of her Ackerman instincts, which turns out to be a lie, but his words reveal that he fundamentally did not respect her because she did not make decisions for herself, only following him. Armin leaps to punch Eren, but Mikasa pins him down before she realizes that she's only reinforcing Eren's words. Conflicted, Mikasa takes off the scarf for the duration of Marley's assault. Once the rumbling begins, Armin screams at her to think for herself. Dejected, she looks for the scarf, only to find it missing. She realizes a wounded Jaeger soldier, Louise, had taken it away. It turned out Eren asked her to throw it away, but because she admired Mikasa so much, she wanted to die with the scarf in hand. Mikasa demands it back anyways. She doesn't wear the scarf for most of the rumbling, but shortly before the final attack, as she reflects on what a different life with Eren could have been, she puts the scarf on again in spite of his wishes as she resolves to kill him. And she does. Ymir was an enslaved little girl who was blamed for freeing pigs from their pen. Punished by King Fritz and hunted for sport, the little girl discovered unfathomable supernatural power, all of which the king took for himself. She was put to work destroying his foes, building his nation, and bearing his children, even taking a spear through the heart that was meant for him. She was beholden to carry on his will of the Titans even after her death, which allowed the Eldian people to turn into Titans. It was revealed in the final chapter, 139, that it was love for the king that compelled her to continue to obey his will and uphold the disastrous reign of the Titans, and she could not simply stop on her own accord. But she was still a little girl who freed the pigs and dreamed of some notion of freedom from this quandary. For those readers who were disgusted by the reveal that Ymir loved the king, I don't disagree, nor do I disagree that it was presented extremely quickly and perhaps ungracefully. However, I don't think it was unmotivated or unmeaningful. I've been wondering why Ymir got in the way of the spear since we first were introduced to her story. Considering that she had been a slave since childhood, I don't understand why there is an expectation of her to make some rational or ideological assessment and decide to turn against Fritz on her own. She's very different from someone like Eren, who was born with an unyielding drive for freedom. The core conceit of her character is a dichotomy between her inability to decide for herself and correspondingly the people who seek her power vying to impose their wills on her. For example, the original King Fritz with the Curse of the Titans, the pacifist King Fritz of Paradise with his vow-renouncing war, and Zeke Yeager with his euthanization plan. This is even reflected in her character design. Despite dying as an adult, she appears everywhere as a child, which symbolizes and embodies her lack of agency and self-determination. It seems plausible to me that a young and impressionable child who grew up under someone's thumb could, quote, love the person oppressing them, albeit in a twisted way. I do understand the visceral disgust at this plot point, but I don't understand why a big portion of the fanbase considers it to be so ridiculous or implausible. But that's enough for now, because the core purpose of this video is to examine Mikasa. So, now we get to the events of chapter 139, where Eren reveals what he knew and what he did. The Ymir-Fritz relationship parallels the Mikasa-Eren relationship, and both Ymir and Eren were aware of this. The Ymir-Fritz story extracts the idea that Mikasa has dedicated much of her life to Eren with disastrous consequences, while the events between Mikasa and Eren are observed by Ymir to gain an understanding of herself and come to a decision regarding whether to end the Curse of the Titans. Ymir could not defy the king, so she waited until a girl quite like herself was in a situation much like her own. She wanted to see if Mikasa could seize freedom for herself. If so, Ymir would follow suit. With an understanding of Ymir's conundrum, Eren chose to set up a test for Mikasa and put her in a situation where she had to overcome her feelings and shared history with him to end his genocidal quest. She chose to kill him, and that was both proof of concept and impetus for Ymir to break free of the king and end the Curse of the Titans. This breakdown is more or less textual. It's all lifted from the manga or directly implied. It just needs to be said as a baseline because the presentation was extremely condensed. This idea probably should have had half a chapter dedicated to it instead of 2 lines, but I'll share my thoughts on the ending later. Let's discuss the subtext a little bit more. In its final arc, Attack on Titan reveals much inspiration from Neon Genesis Evangelion. In particular, I'd like to examine the comparison between Rei Ayanami and Mikasa, as well as comparisons between their defining character relations. This will be mild spoilers for Evangelion, not enough to destroy the experience if you haven't watched it yet, but I do recommend it as an influential work in the medium. So, a brief primer on Rei. Rei Ayanami starts as a shell of a girl, whose only purpose in the world is to serve a paramilitary commander, Gendo Akari. Their relationship is disturbing, to say the least. Gendo impresses upon her that her life is only meaningful in service to him, and she obeys him unfailingly, well past the point of bodily harm. She considers herself replaceable, and this lack of self-worth is evident in her behavior. However, she comes to develop some level of friendship with Gendo's son, and, at the climax of the end of Evangelion, when she finds herself being used again by Gendo as a key to an apocalyptic power, she rejects him, handing that power to his son Shinji instead. On first viewing, I thought of this as an empowerment arc, because she broke free of the person who held her for so long. But I'm no longer so certain about this. From a more cynical angle, all she did was choose a different man to hold her power, and perhaps she never achieved her own liberation. I think this quote-unquote half-arc is a rich concept, because one of Ava's techniques is to textualize viewer experiences and confront the audience's reaction. So, my initial view of Rei's arc as empowerment could be examined as a form of patronizing expectations or even misogyny. I found this self-examination experience with Ava to be the most provocative and long-lasting takeaway from the series, but that's for another time. Now, the reason I bring up Ava in regard to Attack on Titan is because I've been suspecting for some time that elements in AOT are inspired by Ava. There's the motif of the metaphysical little girl observing Armageddon for sure, but the similarities between Rei and Mikasa have been particularly on my mind for some time now. This idea of a little girl with a cold exterior is definitely not exclusive to these two series, but they are well-known instances of this kudere archetype. Heck, at the time of this production, a Google search for kudere has Rei and Mikasa as the second and third results, respectively. But this goes beyond just aesthetics and character design. Rather, the concept of self-determination and liberation from a male figure is front and center at the climaxes of the respective arcs, making for useful comparison, but crucially, Mikasa takes a distinct step beyond Rei. Eren's plan was to set up a test for Mikasa, and she chose to kill him. But if she did this exactly according to plan, I would question how free she is. That's like Rei following the course another man set for her. But then I remembered her scarf, which Mikasa held onto as a symbol of hanging on to her memories and love for Eren, which was against what he was actively pushing for. Recall that he told Louise to dispose of the scarf and was trying to get Mikasa to forget about him, even if his internal feelings were much more immature. Keeping the scarf and hanging on to her memories of Eren flies in the face of his notion of freedom, but why should he be the one to decide what it means? Against Eren's wishes, Mikasa decides to wear the scarf in the final stretch of the assault. This is self-determination, and to me, this is a step beyond what Rei did. Mikasa did what was right by stopping Eren, but still chose what was important to her. I long thought the scarf was a symbol of oppression, and Eren thought similarly, but I guess this means we were both unable to see that's simply what she wanted. The difference is that she's no longer wearing it by default, but rather because she understands what it means to her, and she herself chose to wear it, rather than Eren choosing for her, and that fundamentally makes for a sound and rich premise to conclude Mikasa's arc. So, with Mikasa sitting by the tree on the hill, did she achieve freedom? maybe you could still take a cynical approach and claim she never grew beyond the scarf. It's not as if she's jubilant and happy by the end. But fundamentally, she did what was right, and did it the way she wanted.